don't think this is going to be a quick sale. I think there'll be a couple price reductions. I think it may even be taken off the market, and somebody will quietly acquire it.
There is a reason why some homes remain unsold, no matter how grand or famous they are. Neverland Ranch was not just a property. It was a world created by Michael Jackson to escape from everything he feared outside. It had a zoo, a theme park, and a train that ran through perfectly trimmed gardens. But after Jackson's fall from grace and his death, Neverland became something else entirely. It became a burden.
Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch in Santa Barbara, California is up for sale for $100 million.
The very name began to carry a shadow. For years, no one wanted to buy it. Buyers came and left. Rumors spread. The price dropped again and again. And still, it sat empty. What made the most magical home in the world impossible to sell? Let's begin where the dream started. The Neverland Dream. In 1988, at the height of his fame, Michael Jackson made a purchase that would define much of his later life. He bought Sycamore Valley Ranch, a sprawling 2,700-acre property in Los Olivos, California, for an estimated $17 million. But Jackson didn't just buy a ranch. He bought a blank canvas on which to build a world he never had as a child. Within months, the transformation began. The name was the first thing to change. He renamed it Neverland, inspired by the mythical world in Peter Pan where children never grow up. For Jackson, this name held deep personal meaning. It reflected a longing for innocence, freedom, and joy, experiences he believed his own childhood had denied him. Jackson's upbringing had been anything but normal. Forced into the spotlight at a young age as the lead singer of the Jackson 5, he grew up under strict discipline and the constant pressure of fame. His father, Joseph Jackson, was known for his harsh parenting style. Michael later spoke openly about the emotional scars left by his early life. Neverland was, in many ways, an effort to rewrite that history. It was a chance to create a version of childhood he never got to live. And he spared no effort in building it. The estate was turned into a fantasy land. Jackson built a zoo filled with exotic animals, including elephants, tigers, and a chimpanzee named Bubbles, who became globally recognized. He installed amusement rides, a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, a carousel, and roller coasters. A small-scale railroad circled the grounds, complete with its own red and gold train station, modeled after Disney-style architecture. There was a floral clock near the entrance, sprawling gardens, and dozens of carefully placed sculptures of children playing. Every detail was chosen to reflect happiness, youth, and wonder. But Neverland wasn't just about spectacle. Jackson also made it a creative space. He installed a professional-grade recording studio and a 50-seat movie theater. He used the ranch as a working environment during the creation of albums like Dangerous and History. Music videos were filmed there, including scenes from Childhood, a song that served as a personal reflection on the pain of growing up too fast. Jackson once said, "I see children laughing, playing. I see myself," explaining how deeply he identified with the innocence he tried to recreate in his surroundings. In later years, Neverland became a home to his 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket. He kept them out of the public eye and raised them within the safe, controlled space of the ranch. The estate served both as a fortress from the outside world and a haven for imagination. For Jackson, it was the one place where he had control, peace, and a sense of emotional safety. Yet what began as a dreamland would not stay untouched by reality. The very elements that made Neverland special would later become the focus of controversy and heartbreak. As time passed, the wonder faded. The dream was built, but soon financial and emotional storms would begin to tear it apart. Collapse and takeover. By the late 2000s, the dream Michael Jackson had built at Neverland was already unraveling. Once a symbol of childhood fantasy, the estate had grown into a massive financial burden. The magic had faded, and the price of maintaining the sprawling property was overwhelming. After years of legal troubles, media scrutiny, and mounting debt, Jackson could no longer afford to keep up with the costs. In 2008, he defaulted on a $24.5 million loan that had been secured using Neverland as collateral. For the first time, the fate of his most treasured refuge was no longer in his hands. That same year, real estate investment firm Colony Capital, led by billionaire Thomas Barrick Jr., stepped in to prevent a public foreclosure. The firm purchased the debt and took control of the property. Though the move was framed as a partnership to help Jackson regain stability, in practice, it meant that ownership of Neverland had shifted. Jackson retained some interest, but effective control of the estate was now in corporate hands. The home that had once symbolized freedom and innocence was now the property of businessmen who saw it less as a sanctuary and more as an investment. At this point, Jackson was in a fragile state. He had retreated further from public life and was no longer living at Neverland. After the 2005 criminal trial, in which he was acquitted of child molestation charges, he had moved out of the estate entirely and vowed never to return. The ranch had become tainted in his mind, a place forever linked to humiliation and public judgment. In fact, Jackson lived in rented homes, including one in Las Vegas, and occasionally stayed overseas. Neverland, once his prized possession, was now a locked and empty shell. Despite the shift in ownership, Colony Capital tried to present a hopeful outlook. In a public statement, the firm expressed its vision for the estate's future. "We look forward to this magnificent property being enjoyed by a new curator." They were confident that, with the right buyer, Neverland could begin a new chapter. But they had underestimated the challenges ahead. The house was no longer just a property. It had become a complex and controversial piece of cultural history. Tragically, less than a year after Colony Capital took over Neverland, Michael Jackson died from acute propofol intoxication in June 2009. His sudden death shocked the world and triggered an outpouring of grief from millions of fans. The estate, now legally rebranded as Sycamore Valley Ranch, became even more complicated. Jackson's legacy had instantly become more valuable and more polarizing. What was once a deeply personal dream had become a legal and emotional quagmire. Colony Capital found itself holding an asset that carried more symbolic weight than commercial value. The next step was to set a price, but that number would prove to be as unrealistic as the dream that built it. The $100 million listing no one took seriously. In 2015, 6 years after Michael Jackson's death and 7 years after Colony Capital took control of Neverland, the estate was officially listed for sale. The asking price stunned the public and raised eyebrows across the real estate world. Colony Capital, through luxury realty firm Sotheby's International Realty, put Neverland on the market for $100 million. This figure seemed to ignore the reality of the estate's condition, location, and reputation. What had once been a world of fantasy had become a deteriorating, high-maintenance property in a rural area with limited appeal to luxury buyers. Yet Colony Capital believed, or hoped, that the Jackson name would justify the price. The estate, now rebranded as Sycamore Valley Ranch, was being marketed as a rare and historic opportunity. But real estate analysts quickly saw through the veneer. Los Olivos, California, where the estate sits, is beautiful but isolated. It is primarily known for vineyards, not multi-million-dollar celebrity compounds. It lacks the kind of prestige, infrastructure, or visibility found in areas like Beverly Hills or Malibu, which often justify high price tags. Simply put, the estate was too remote to be considered competitive in the high-end market. Moreover, the property was no longer the magical wonderland it had once been. The zoo animals were gone. The amusement rides had been dismantled. The iconic clock and train station remained, but much of the estate's personality had faded. The grounds, though still vast and picturesque, showed signs of neglect. Maintaining a 2,700-acre ranch, especially one built for a very specific entertainment-focused lifestyle, was incredibly expensive. Some reports estimated the annual upkeep alone reached hundreds of thousands of dollars, excluding the cost of any necessary repairs or restorations. Buyers were also expected to invest millions more to modernize and personalize the estate. Its layout, features, and purpose were highly tailored to Jackson's vision. Without the original context of his ownership, much of the property felt impractical. It was neither a traditional family home nor a commercially viable resort. Real estate insiders quietly began referring to it as a white elephant, a grand and expensive property that no one really wanted. The listing was seen as an act of financial optimism, if not outright denial. No serious offers were made, and no high-profile names stepped forward. The $100 million price tag may have ignored market logic, but even a more reasonable figure could not fix Neverland's biggest problem: its legacy and its troubled history. And no buyer wanted to inherit the most painful one: scandal, reputation, and legal fallout. Even at its most beautiful, Neverland Ranch was never just a house. It was a symbol. And as Michael Jackson's legal troubles grew in the 1990s and 2000s, the symbolism of Neverland changed. It became the focus of allegations that would haunt Jackson's life and legacy. In 1993, Jackson was first accused of child molestation by the family of a 13-year-old boy. Though the case was settled out of court with no formal admission of guilt, the damage to Jackson's public image was severe. The accusations placed Neverland at the center of suspicion, as many of the alleged incidents were said to have occurred on the property. In 2005, Jackson faced criminal charges of child molestation in a highly publicized trial. Once again, Neverland was the setting, with prosecutors describing it as a location designed to lure and manipulate young boys. The trial featured disturbing testimony and painted a version of Neverland that stood in stark contrast to the innocent fantasy Jackson had tried to create. Jackson was acquitted on all counts, but public trust did not fully recover. For many, the trial left an impression that could not be erased. Even years after his death, the allegations refused to fade. In 2019, the HBO documentary Leaving Neverland reignited public outrage. The film featured two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who claimed Jackson had done horrible things to them when they were children. Their accounts were graphic, emotional, and detailed, and much of the alleged events took place at Neverland. Though the documentary did not present new legal evidence, it had a powerful cultural impact. Major radio stations temporarily removed Jackson's music, brands distanced themselves from his estate, and the word Neverland once again appeared in global headlines, for all the wrong reasons. Tabloids and media outlets began using the term pedophile's playground to describe the estate. It became one of the most circulated labels attached to the property, overshadowing its original purpose. The imagery that once defined Neverland, merry-go-rounds, train rides, laughing children, was now seen through a darker lens. The innocence Jackson tried to preserve had been publicly reframed as something sinister. In this context, selling Neverland was not just a business transaction, it was a public risk. Real estate agents privately admitted that the ranch was seen as untouchable. Anyone who bought it might face protests, online backlash, or public relations nightmares. Ideas to convert the property into a Graceland-style museum were floated, but quickly dismissed. Unlike Elvis Presley's home, Neverland carried too much emotional controversy to become a profitable tourist destination. It was no longer a site of celebration. It was a reminder. The burden was clear. Even if the price were right, the name, the history, and the public perception made Neverland nearly impossible to sell. But as the years passed, Colony Capital would try a new tactic. They dropped the price again, this time in a move so drastic it shocked even the most cynical observers. The price collapse. By 2017, 2 years after the initial $100 million listing, it was clear that no one was going to buy Neverland Ranch at that price. The estate had drawn headlines, but no real offers. Colony Capital responded by slashing the asking price to $67 million, a $33 million drop that stunned some observers, but still failed to attract serious buyers. The message was clear. Even at 2/3 of its original valuation, Neverland remained too difficult to sell. Then, in 2019, the firm made an even more dramatic move. The property was relisted for $31 million, marking a total reduction of 69% from the original listing. It was one of the steepest devaluations ever seen for a celebrity estate of this scale. Industry insiders began to speculate that the financial pressure inside Colony Capital was mounting. Some reports suggested internal disagreements over how aggressively to market the property and how far to lower the price. It seemed that desperation had taken over optimism. The firm wanted it off their books. The new listing stirred intense reactions. On social media, fans expressed sadness and disbelief. Many viewed Neverland as sacred, even with all its complications. The thought that it could be sold for less than the price of a luxury apartment in Manhattan made some fear the worst. Would it be torn down, rezoned, turned into a luxury vineyard or high-end development? The sense of loss deepened as the asking price dropped. For those who remembered the Neverland of the 1990s, the fire sale price felt like a betrayal of history. Despite the reduced price and renewed press coverage, no serious buyer came forward. The stigma surrounding Neverland still loomed too large. A bargain in numbers did not erase its emotional and reputational cost. Luxury real estate agents understood that buying the estate meant stepping into a public controversy. Most investors were not willing to do that. The sharp decline in value didn't just reflect changes in the real estate market. It mirrored the fall of Neverland itself, from dreamland to damaged goods. And as the price dropped lower, people began to wonder, was anyone actually trying to buy it, or had the estate become truly unsellable? That question would soon be answered, but the truth would reveal even more disappointment. Failed suitors. In 2019, when the estate was relisted at $31 million, real estate agents confirmed that several undisclosed parties expressed interest. But none of those discussions resulted in formal offers. According to reports, many of these prospects were discouraged once they fully understood the estate's public image problems. The backlash that might follow any purchase, especially from public figures or corporations, was considered too risky. There was a real concern that headlines would not read "Billionaire buys historic estate," but rather, "Celebrity buys Michael Jackson's infamous Neverland." Owning Neverland didn't just come with a deed, it came with a narrative. A few years earlier, in 2013, a potential buyer with real resources entered the picture. Joe Bamford, the British industrial heir to the JCB fortune, was reportedly interested in acquiring the property. Early reports even suggested that a deal was being structured, but nothing came of it. Bamford quietly walked away, and no public explanation followed. Speculation at the time focused on two possibilities. Either the property's condition and future costs were too daunting, or the social and political implications of buying a place tied so closely to abuse allegations were simply not worth the investment. Going back even further, in 2007, long before Michael Jackson's death, there were rumors that actors Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were considering Neverland. These reports circulated briefly in the entertainment media, but were quickly dismissed by Jackson's spokesperson. At that time, the property wasn't even listed for sale, and the rumor never turned into a real negotiation. However, the idea that such a high-profile couple could even be connected to the estate was enough to highlight the level of interest that once existed, before scandal took hold of its story. Behind the scenes, Colony Capital reportedly rejected or ignored various inquiries over the years. Some were deemed unserious, others may have offered too little, but there were also suggestions that the firm was reluctant to let go at a steep loss, or feared that selling to a buyer who didn't understand the estate's sensitive public image could invite new controversy. The risk of the property being flipped, commercialized irresponsibly, or associated with someone controversial added more complexity to every negotiation. In the end, it wasn't just about who could afford Neverland. It was about who was willing to own the story attached to it. And for over a decade, the answer was no one. As the estate remained unsold and untouched, the public began turning to darker explanations. If no one would buy it, was something else keeping them away? Controversial theories. For some, especially online, Neverland's refusal to sell was not just about property value or reputation. It was about something deeper, something darker. A growing number of people believed the land itself had become cursed, damaged not just financially but spiritually. Across online forums, conspiracy channels, and fringe communities, Neverland was increasingly portrayed as cursed ground. The reasoning was emotional, not practical. According to these voices, the property had absorbed the pain and trauma of those who had been there, whether real or alleged. The carousel that once spun with laughter was now seen as a symbol of manipulation. The floral clock, once whimsical, was reinterpreted as a marker of lost innocence. Neverland, they claimed, had been permanently scarred by its past and would bring misfortune to anyone who tried to possess it. Some of the more extreme theories claimed that Neverland was connected to powerful people involved in harming and exploiting children. In these stories, Michael Jackson was either seen as part of this hidden world or as someone who had been used by others in the entertainment industry. According to these claims, the estate wasn't just a personal home. It was a place where secret actions took place, protected by people with influence. There was no solid evidence for any of these claims, but many online groups repeated them, especially after the Leaving Neverland documentary came out. For those who believed these theories, buying Neverland meant becoming part of something dark, secretive, and dangerous. Other theories suggested paranormal activity. Stories from former staff, neighbors, and anonymous sources claimed that strange events occurred at the estate after Jackson's death. Voices in the night, unexplained lights, feelings of dread. Some claimed to see Jackson's ghost. Others reported the laughter of children echoing in empty rooms. While many of these stories were clearly speculative or embellished, they added to the property's aura of unease. What began as a place of imagination had, in some minds, become a haunted symbol of controversy. The theories may have varied, from curses to ghosts to global conspiracies, but they all had one thing in common. They made Neverland more than a house. They made it a myth, one too heavy and dangerous to touch. Yet despite all the fear, rumors, and superstition, someone eventually did step forward to buy Neverland. But even that final sale would prove the weight of its legacy could not be escaped. The final sale, an uncertain future. In December 2020, more than a decade after Michael Jackson's death, Neverland Ranch was finally sold. The buyer was Ron Burkle, a billionaire investor, longtime associate of the Jackson family, and co-founder of the Yucaipa companies. The sale price was just $22 million, a fraction of the $100 million it had been listed for 5 years earlier. The number shocked many, not only because of how far it had fallen, but because someone was finally willing to take it. But Burkle did not buy Neverland to live in it. In interviews and public statements, he referred to the purchase as a land banking opportunity. This meant he saw it purely as an investment, a way to hold valuable land for potential future use. It was not a tribute to Jackson's memory. It was not a preservation effort, and it was certainly not a plan to reopen the gates to the public. Burkle has never moved in. He has not announced any restoration plans. The estate has remained closed and unchanged. The once vibrant ranch, filled with rides, animals, and music, now sits in silence. The gates are locked. The train station is empty. The flowers that once spelled Neverland at the entrance have long since faded. Some reports suggested that Burkle's advisors had warned him against the purchase. The property's history, controversy, and emotional weight made it risky. Buying it could attract attention Burkle didn't want. Attention not from investors, but from activists, critics, and fans still divided over Jackson's legacy. If true, these warnings may explain why the estate has been left untouched. Today, speculation continues about what will happen next. Some believe Burkle may eventually resell it, possibly in smaller parcels. Others hope the estate could be turned into a museum, one that honors Jackson's music while carefully navigating his legacy. There are also calls for it to be demolished entirely, allowing the land to return to its natural state, free from the shadows of the past. A few dream of it becoming a quiet retreat, a place to reflect, far from the headlines. This is shocking to many, especially those who grew up seeing Neverland as a place of wonder. That such a famous estate could sit untouched for years with no clear future in sight seems unthinkable. But the silence has become part of its story. No announcements, no public plans. Neverland remains in a strange state of limbo, owned but unused. Like its former owner, the property has become a symbol caught between greatness and grief, between love and controversy, between myth and memory. Whether it becomes a monument, a ruin, or something else entirely, one thing is clear. Neverland is no ordinary property. It carries too much weight for any buyer to lift alone. For now, the gates remain shut, and the world is left waiting to see what, if anything, comes next. What do you think about Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.